Oh, well, listen, I'm pretty excited today. Kelly McMasters, author of The Leaving Season, is here with me to talk writing and lots more. Kelly, how you doing?
I'm wonderful, Bill. Thank you so much for having me today.
I'm very excited to have you on. So just a little background about Kelly and me. Not that we have a long history, but we have a brief history. We met at the Irma Bumbeck Writers Conference this past winter, I
When
guess,
was that?
spring.
I think it was winter.
Um, and I liked her very much. We got to talking about memoir and and things like that. And I mention this only because I don't know if you've had this experience, but it's kind of odd. Usually, I've interviewed, a lot of writers. Usually, I read their books and I meet them, and it's interesting. But in this case, it's reversed. I met you, and then I read not just your book, but a memoir. Have you ever done that where you met a person, got to know them, and then you picked up their memoir and had to read it from that perspective?
In fact, I shared a cab from the airport to the Irma Bumbeck Festival, to Irma Palooza, with an amazing writer named Alyssa Bassist. And we hit it off and became sort of, when you go to those conferences and you make a best friend. And
Yes.
so we
Yep.
became best friends. And then I read her memoir afterwards, and such a strange experience.
It is. It is. I went through that with Andre Dubus, who I met him. He was the first one, and I read his memoir, Townie. Have you read that?
That is one of my all-time
It
desert island
it
favorites.
really is. I got to say, I was like, and you know what's interesting? After I read it and I interviewed him, like I'd known him before, and we'd gotten to know each other a little bit. And I interviewed him. I was like, "Look, Andre, I don't want to blow smoke up your skirt here, but like that was a really, really good book." He's like, "Oh, I need to hear it. Don't worry, I need it like everybody else." He said, "I'm an insecure writer, like every so for whatever it's worth." But it is kind of weird, isn't it? Because I don't know if I'm reading it right in a way, because I keep picturing you and hearing
Uh-huh.
your voice and picturing you doing these things. What do you think?
I don't know if there is a right or wrong way,
Well, that's true. Okay. I grant you that.
but it is a different experience, even with this book coming out. Reading, it's so much easier to read to a group of people that I don't know, as opposed to, some of the readings like in my hometown, which are full of people I do know.
It
And that
is.
is much harder.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I tell my students, and so by the way, one of the reasons, Kelly's a really nice person, so that was the main reason we connected. But she's one of my memoir sisters, and we both. I just am pretty much just finishing a book now that's a collect. Yeah, very excited about it, but it's a collection of stories that constructs a memoir, and the Leaving Season is similar. They're you called them essays. I would think they're a mixture of story essays. It tells a story, which is primarily circles around you and a divorce that you had with somebody. But you really do it in each chapter is not just one the story continued, it's its own story, which I love, not just because I do it, but I really feel like it's a nice way to take in somebody's. And so we'll start there. You was the atomic the what was the your I'm sorry, your first memoir
Oh, sure. Welcome to Shirley, a memoir from an atomic town.
was that told more traditionally in one story? Okay.
It was, however, looking back, I would argue that the chapters there are essayistic.
Interesting.
However, it is much more traditional, straightforward narrative. It would
Right.
be harder to read out of order,
Right.
uh, which with the Leaving Season, the goal is you could read from beginning to end, and I hope
Right.
people do. You could
Yeah.
also,
You could. I would recommend it beginning to end though, just because. I mean, you do things do evolve, but each chapter is its own thing. So, what? Why that approach? Was it even an option? Why did you make that decision?
I like only another writer would say, was that even an option? Because you're right, it wasn't. It's just how the story wanted to come out.
Yeah.
Uh, and I think primarily in the way that I approach narrative, like if you just give me a free day of writing, what
Yep.
will come out is an essay.
Right.
It's how I process, it's how I think. And so initially we did think, and in the first book the subtitle is a memoir and essays.
Uh huh.
This one they did switch to just a memoir.
Yeah.
The word essay, as an English professor,
This
I
is,
it's scary.
it is. And you and I were having this conversation, and I've just, in my book, the subtitle would be A Memoir in Stories. I decided to drop because that word essay, I just have a problem with it because it
Yeah.
feels like what you're assigning your students to. I mean, I don't, do you do just like composition classes, or is it only creative writing?
Just creative writing,
Okay.
and right, it is so many of my essays are very deeply researched, but the feel of them, the texture is, in my mind, essayistic, which means one thing. But for many people who have gone through the trauma of middle school 5-paragraph essay,
That's right.
right, that which my children are going through right now. And the other day, in the mini crossword for the New York Times, uh,
Yes, because I do that now. There was essay. I thought of you.
and the definition was something like what your English professor would
Yes.
assign you, and
I think it's why we got to get rid of it because I think it has. I mean, in terms of what we're trying to do. Also, I would point out one of the reasons I don't like it, and not to keep harping on this, but your chapters, I would call them stories because there is a satisfying ending, which I think where I think an essay doesn't require that of its authors sometimes. It's sort of like, let me just think about things a little bit. I mean, I love endings. I think it's the most important part of a story. I'm evangelical about it, but not everybody is. And yours, I found satisfying. I feel like that's what gives it more of a story feel, whereas an essay is just a thought piece sometimes. Yeah.
yeah, there's a meandering quality. You're not required to have a payoff at the end.
No.
I prefer essays that do. I certainly, where I usually land is a place where you can still imagine that there's not an answer to a question, but we've arrived somewhere new.
Yeah.
So it's,
I think you've got to.
yes.
You've got to arrive somewhere. Because here's the thing, you're telling the story for a reason, right? You got to be telling it for a reason, not just because you like to write, although sometimes I have written for that purpose, and that's not enough, right? Like I just, like you're sitting around a dinner table, like I want to talk now. I'll come up with something, right? I mean, we've been there, at least I have,
Mhm.
right? But
Yes.
why are you telling the story? Okay, so you decided to write about this is what I love about this book, because if I told people what it was about, if I told an agent what it was about, they would say, "Ugh, it's been done.
Yep.
Another divorce book. Oh, please." Right? Wouldn't they? Wouldn't
Yes.
But it doesn't matter. It's how you handle it. It's what you do with it and what you see in it. So talk to me about the courage, if you needed any, to say, I'm going to write a sort of a divorce book, something which is a fairly common experience. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember, oh gosh, maybe 15 years ago, sitting with a friend who she's written both fiction and memoir, and her agent had just put a book out on submission, her memoir, and the response from an editor was, mother-daughter stories are so done.
Oh, God,
Right.
I want to strangle these people. Okay, let's never talk. Another story about a mother and daughter. I can't see any reason people would be interested in that. Okay, sorry,
It
go on.
just blows my mind. I feel like that is so reductive and damaging to the possibility, especially of nonfiction. So
Yeah.
for me, you're right. In order to write the book, and I probably wrote this, I don't know, 4 or 5 different times, draft
Yeah.
wise.
Yeah.
And so maybe the third draft, I went into it as this is a divorce book. Uh,
Oh, okay.
but then by the fourth, fifth draft, what I understood and what I hope people come away with is that it's a love story. Like every divorce story begins as a love story.
Right.
But this is a love story mostly about motherhood, about returning to self. Right. So the divorce is part of it. It's a catalyst. It's definitely the defining plot point.
Yep.
Uh, However, as a book, and now, right, when this came out in 2023, it was just sort of the beginning of the little mountain that is now a giant, it's like the Alps of divorce right now in the bookstore. Uh,
Oh, oh,
which,
is it that you have a lot of company, do you?
yes, which is wonderful,
Sure.
I think. But before, 5, 10 years ago, I remember reading Gina Frangella's amazing book, Blow Your House Down. and just feeling like nobody had written like this before and been as
Right.
open. And I think for me, that felt essentially focusing on each essay as something that felt shameful and
Oh,
delving into that
yeah.
so that it wasn't divorce that was at the center, but different elements of shame
Yeah.
uh, returning to that. And so I think, you know,
Is it the shame of failure? I mean, isn't that kind of, because my mom, when she divorced, because my parents divorced when I was young, and I remember talking to me, he's like, "Oh, I felt like a failure," which always puzzled me. Like, come on, you needed out of that thing, kind of, and this it made no sense to me at first. When I thought of failure, it was always around sort of achievement type things. But now, I mean, I have not been divorced, but I get it. I could see how you feel like we failed as a couple. We didn't, right? So I can see that actually.
well, and so much of marriage, I think, is fantasy. Right.
It can be.
It can be. Right. Fantasy that it will be dispelled. I don't mean like this is a fantasy.
Right. No, right. I get you. I get you. Yep.
Yeah. And like all fantasies, you grow up and a relationship grows up and you move out of that period. And some people grow up together and are able to change and build things together and continue on, and others can't.
Yeah.
And you're right that that is in our culture often viewed as a failure. Um, I think I certainly viewed that as a failure. And
Right.
for for my family, there was also that feeling of both of my parents were divorced before they found each other. So
Oh, oh, that's
my
interesting. So they were a little older also, probably.
yes, a little older,
Yeah.
um, and my parents are still together.
That's
And
why your father said what he did. That's probably 'cause it's from the book. Your father says something really prescient, sort of to you as a girl, kind of, weren't you?
oh my gosh, I mean, in the 70s, yeah, he said he made it clear when I was, and I'm an only child, growing up, that I did not have to get married. That was not something I had to do. In fact, I probably shouldn't. Right?
Wow. He
Just
smelled something in you, boy.
yes. Yeah. Yeah, and that's somebody who is happily married.
Right.
He's
Right.
happily married, but that's from I think he is very he took fatherhood, and I think you will understand this from your work. He took fatherhood so seriously,
Yeah.
and it was such an intentional experience for him that he wanted to make sure he did have a younger sister,
Mm.
so he thought about these things, and she also wasn't married and was also a writer.
Oh, wow. Wow.
So
Okay.
I think there were these things that were really important to him. And you're right, that messaging came from nowhere else in my life and in my understanding and culture, and until much later. So
Yeah.
that was really freeing.
Well, I just came from another writers conference, and I brought your book along, and it was excellent company. I must say, a lot of times I bring books to conferences, like, oh, I'll bring a book, I'll read, and I don't read anything. I just stare at a television, but I was really glad I brought it. It was really good company, um, and you have this is something I don't know if you can even answer this, but one of the skills you have, I think, is rendering the physical world.
Mm.
Now you might take that for granted, but I realize like I don't spend a lot of time doing that. For whatever reason, it's just not where I land. Not that people are floating in space, but it's just I don't dwell there that much. But I really love how you do it. But I was reading it and with my writer's eye going, ooh, I like that. Ooh, that was good. Ooh, that. And I've been doing that a lot, Kelly. And I thought, that is a skill you have to build. And do you find yourself getting better at it the way I find myself getting better at other things where I don't spend as long writing certain kinds of sentences anymore that I used to have to really teach myself how to write, that some of that rendering comes faster to you because you must have taken some kind of an interest in it early in your writing. Do you even understand my question?
I do, absolutely. And I'm so grateful. And I appreciate that comment. It is something that is really important to me in
Yeah.
early in my career, during an interview, somebody for the Common, somebody the interviewer called me a landscape writer, and I had never thought about that.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh my, yes, that feels
Yeah.
so true to me. It's
Yeah.
always central to my plots, to my the way I see things, to my lens, and um, and it's something I do work at. It's a muscle like anything else.
Sure. Sure.
To be out in the world, noticing on a daily basis in order to then
Yeah.
bring it to the page.
Yeah.
Uh, and a lot of this book was written after I was sort of excised from the places I was writing about.
Sure. Sure. It's easier.
It's easier. There's a much better critical distance.
Yeah.
However, what I found, especially when I was writing about the rural Pennsylvania parts, which, I have such a complicated relationship, but I loved the landscape there and was so in tune with it. And so to write some of those pieces, I did find I had to go up and I would I would sort of chart. I didn't want to go back. I didn't want to go
Right.
there,
Yeah.
but I would sort of figure out, like Woodstock, for example, or, some places in the Catskills are along the same sort of, like hardiness scale as
Right.
Gardner.
Sure. Sure.
So the forests will be similar. The frogs will be similar.
Right.
So I wound up going to those places for, a weekend, getting an Airbnb and just holing up. And
Really? So you went back to reconnect to nature to, oh my,
yeah.
you really do take it seriously. Wow.
Oh, it's I think from uh early from being an only child, and nature was sort of
Oh,
my
you seek
healing.
company.
Yes, and still today, and even through this book, that's where I gain a lot of comfort, and I gain a lot of introspective um sourcing. I'm
Yep.
not sure what the right
Yep.
word is. It
Yep.
helps me see. I really, watching nature, being reminded that there's architecture, there's logic that comes from nature, then to apply to my own life really helps me in a kind of anxiety place.
Yep. Helps you soothe your anxiety. Well, you're in connect, it's sort of like sometimes what animals will do for people because animals don't have the creative mind, which can be helpful because they're just present. You can sort of tune to the cat or the dog, in particular, and it'll calm you down. And nature is the same way. Nature doesn't judge anything. It has no opinion. It has no shame. It has no. But I always think of this. We don't. It's hard for us to think. I think sometimes human beings to think this way because we're such almost anomalies in the physical world because we've got this mind that operates this way. But we are as much life as the tree, as the blue whale, as the field. I mean, life courses through us. Just because we have a mind that does all this thinking and analyzing and questioning doesn't mean we aren't coursing through. And I always feel like when you tune to something like nature or an animal, you're tuning to something that's in them, that's in you, that has no judgment. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and it's bigger than us.
And yes, yeah, yeah, it is. And it will last longer. That used to freak me out a little bit. I was writing about how I would go to the ocean and I liked it and I hated it because the part I hate was like, it's telling me nothing you're worried about matters, but I'm not ready to accept that. But I can't argue with the ocean because it's just so clear, like none of this matters. You know that, right? But I like, no, it does matter, I think. So
Yeah, I mean, and there's that um dark side of nature that I
yeah,
think,
the violent side of it or the
the
right.
brutal side of it, which is as compelling to me as the beauty and softness and connectivity. Like I remember being on my porch in Pennsylvania and watching this beautiful butterfly and just feeling like, oh, I feel like, I don't know, Cinderella. And here is this
Right.
beautiful landscape in front of me. It's gorgeous, this butterfly. And then a bird comes swooping down and just grabs it. And then for a minute, like eats it and takes it, the whole thing into its beak, like bit by bit by bit. And it was wild. And
What a great moment.
oh my gosh.
Oh,
But how brutal, right? That
yep.
is
Yep.
The bird doesn't care about the beauty of the butterfly. And I love moments like that in particular.
See, it strikes me that one of the challenges, because I've read some writers who have skill in their descriptive ability, but I feel like you got to rein it in. Like, I'm not sure this is contributing to the narrative. Like I don't want to watch a landscape. I still need a story, and I felt you did a really good job of that. And it seems like that's the challenge of that kind of writing is you can do it, but it has to contribute. Like, because you didn't just stand there and keep do it. You can probably just like a painter because you enjoy that connecting, but it has to connect to the story, right? It has to have some kind of emotional movement to it, or else it can't be there. It's a darling that would need to be killed.
It does. And yes, I hope, I mean, I'm there are plenty of places as I'm reading out loud sometimes that I feel like, oh, that is a darling. Oh, but but my feeling of what I wanted, and not necessarily for a reader to come away with, and I'm seeing it so overtly, but this book, when we went on submission, for example, it was positioned as a landscape focused book. There were
Oh,
three
really?
sections. Yes, that was the main
I
overarching.
would think that would be a hard sell. I would think that would not be. I mean, no, but the market and all that crap, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure that was the the best idea. Uh, but initially, um, the thinking was, it's divided into three sections, and it's the city, the country, and the suburbs.
Right.
And so each section, what I'm really hoping to do on sort of a intellectual curiosity level is look at the way that landscape informs identity,
Hmm.
and specifically a woman, my identity, because I changed and shifted, and the expectations were so different in each place. And so,
Right. Well, yeah, because your description of the country, I have met you and I thought Kelly shouldn't be out there. What is she doing? What is she doing? Because she describes a kind of, I mean, what we would now call Trump country, what we described as like hardcore Trump. And we learned how Trumpy. Sorry to you listeners who like Trump, but this is where I am right now. But and my thought was like, what the hell is Kelly doing out there? From what little I know of her, this doesn't sound like a fit, but you found your way in there kind of in your own way.
yeah, and I think, like any good novel or any kind of good character development, what was probably the most fulfilling, I don't know, that seems like a cheesy word, but the best
Nothing
part.
wrong with being fulfilled,
Okay,
Kelly. It's good.
okay, I'm gonna write that down. Bill says wrong with being fulfilled. um, being able to see these mostly men in these hills in
Sure.
particular, but
Yeah.
women too, as whole characters and in full humanity. So even if I didn't agree with a lot of their politics, or yes, I am super progressive, and
Yeah.
I didn't pretend that I wasn't.
Right.
That was a friction in our relationship, but because we were neighbors, and that sense of community was stronger than the politics for the
Yeah.
way that they
Yeah.
survived.
Yeah.
Uh, and they took care of each other. And there was all
Yeah.
this, these really beautiful moments alongside, just like that nature moment with the butterfly and the bird, alongside the brutality and reality of hate, um, you know, radicalism, things like this, that
Yeah.
but they're both there. And I think each
Which was
human.
also born somewhat out of that region, just the sort of isolation, the feeling of being probably looking upon urban areas as like, what the hell is going on in there? These people, they don't know anything. And I would think that that also created their personalities to some degree,
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I remember once going into a diner and saying, "Oh, we just drove in from the city," or I was nervous to drive to the city. This was after a car accident,
Right.
and
Yep.
and the the very sweet waitress was like, "Oh, honey, it's not that far," and she was being very kind, and she was talking about Scranton.
Yeah. The big cité.
Yeah. And
You
I was
know?
talking about Manhattan. So, and the that kind of um, welcome, though, the my first book, Welcome to Shirley, is about this sort of blue collar South Shore town next to the Hamptons, and I
Right.
understand that feeling of being a townie. Speaking of,
Yep.
Andre's
Yep.
book, and here that what you just said, that observation that a lot of it was born out of their geographic location. The isolation changes in summer, and the hugest
Right.
all the summer camp folks, and these summer camps are so expensive. I mean,
Right.
kid's tuition is probably more than what most people make in a year there.
Oh
And
my God.
I'm not even exaggerating.
I believe you. I believe
And
you.
so these very fancy cars would whip by these country roads, and on one hand, when I was so I owned a bookshop for a
Yep.
period. And when, those few weeks of summer when the parents' weekends happened, and the money would flood in, and it was good, and you love them, yet they're
Yeah.
so different,
Yeah.
right? And
Oh
so
yeah.
I think you're right that and it's not an easy life, compassionate life together. It is very, very siloed.
Yeah, for sure. I could talk to you about a lot. The one thing though that occurred to me that I thought, oh, I got to ask her about this. There's a great chapter early on. So your husband, whose name shall not be known,
Are
uh, R, is a painter, and he's a painter. Like he is a professional. He's showing gallery painter, and he does still lives. He will get models and paint them, and you really want to be painted at one point, which he agrees to do. And it was not what you'd hoped, and it was sort of uncomfortable and all this. Okay. But what I thought of is like, well, memoirists are kind of portrait artists themselves. And I thought, what have you ever wondered about yourself being the subject of a story the way you were of a painting? Because I don't think I ever have been. My whole family has been, of course, of my stuff. But have you ever wondered about if the roles were reversed on in a written form? Because you have done that with people,
Oh my gosh, yes. And
right?
it's I I'm uncomfortable just thinking about it.
You
It's
mean you think about someone turning their writer's eye on you, but aren't they? I mean, what became clear with your husband is it wasn't painting you in a weird way, but aren't we kind of doing the same thing? Kind of. I mean, right?
we're only writing ourselves.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
It's it's all even if it's not memoir, right? I think
yeah.
most times we're writing ourselves. And I did have I had maybe something close to this experience just this past year. My younger son um wrote a memoir in for school.
Okay.
and and it was about a trip that we took, and the teacher was really concerned because it was supposed to be 3 pages, and she didn't feel like the story was even close to being over by the end of page 2,
Hmm.
because it was like a spring break trip that we took,
Okay.
and he was still at the airport
Gotcha.
on
Yep.
page 2. And for him, the story was the airport, which I
Right.
found fascinating.
Yeah.
And I was this presence, sort of
Oh. Oh no. Oh no.
just this sort of unseen, towering in the background, telling people what to do, where to put your bag, are you ready yet? In the background presence, which I was in that scene. I have my
Yep.
own understanding of that scene. And so it was really, I thought, a great exercise and reminder of, you know, many people will ask when, especially before the book came out, when I said what I was writing about,
Yeah.
they would say, well, what if your children read it?
Yeah.
Uh, and I wrote, really cognizant of that. And I want them at some point later when they're older to read this.
Yep.
Uh, and so it was really interesting then to see his view. And it's a great reminder that just because his experience of that airport morning was so different from mine,
Yeah.
there both valid. They're both our stories.
Oh, totally. And in fact, I tell my memoir students, I'm like, because they worry like, oh, I'm doing all these personal things. I'm writing about these personal things. I would say, okay, here's the secret sauce. The reader doesn't care about you. They care about themselves. And I mean, because this is why it's different for me, because I do like you. So I kind of care about, I cared about you in a way I wouldn't if I didn't know you. I'm like, oh, I hope she's okay. Why is she marrying that guy? She shouldn't do that. So I was kind of going through that, but they don't actually care, but they want to be entertained. They want to be inspired, and they don't care about you. They don't know anything. They don't really know anything about you, right? Because even that person on the page is not really you.
Oh,
You're you. And that's slightly different, right? I hope. I mean, she's
oh,
okay. I mean, she's a smart person and she's got a lot of observations, but you're you. And it's pretty hard to capture all of yourself on there, at least, I think.
yes. And it's constructed just like, that in the same way that we can narrativize nature and
Yeah.
use it on the page. We're doing that with ourselves, and we're
Yeah.
picking and choosing. It's all constructive. It's work. It's
Yeah.
what. So this is not my diary. This is not my journal. It's not my therapy room, right? It is processed. There is critical distance, and this you're reading, in some of the essays, you're reading like the 20th draft,
Yeah.
less the fifth, right? So
Right.
it is constructed and it is art.
Yes. It is art. That's what it is. You're taking your life and you're making art out of it. That's what you're doing. Yes, yes, yes. It's so close to fiction. I feel it very close. Some of it's not people, but where it comes from is very close to fiction, I think. All right. Well, yeah, it was much fun to talk to over Zoom. Well, no, I'd rather talk to you around the bar at the hotel, but this is fun too. The leaving season, it's good company. It's beautiful stuff. But I'm not done with you, young lady. I'm not done with you. I've got one more question. And what I want you to do is think of all the writing you've done. And you did a lot, actually. Interesting. You talk about your writing kind of on a side note in this. So you've done a lot of writing, but think about it all. And if it's taught you anything about being a person, about life, it's taught you what?
Go towards the fear.
Oh, yes. Yes. That's where the juice is, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah. I'm just going to leave it there. Kelly, thank you so much. This has been awesome.
Thank you, Bill. This was fantastic.